Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Palmer, how are you?
Doing good, John. How are you doing?
I'm fabulous as always. It's another good day to talk to you, and that's always a good day in my book. So, yeah, I'm alive. I'm above ground, so I'm winning, as Charlie Sheen would say.
I'll break you of that whole good to talk to me thing. I'll break you of that eventually.
Eventually, it hasn't happened yet, so I'm doubting it'll happen. But anyways, it's nice to see we're both dressing up a little bit more. You've got the hat on, and so we're repping the brand. I love it.
Well, I didn't get a chance to cut my hair this weekend, so it's now a disaster. It's beyond disaster. Yeah. So
I didn't cut my hair this weekend either. True story. I mean, not that you could tell, but I really didn't. So before we go too far off the rails, what's going on, man?
Yeah. So, top 10 time again.
Again? We still have more of those?
We still have, I think we got 3 more. So we're now squarely into May. I just double checked. It's May. We got 3 more. So let's go ahead and knock one of those out.
I like that.
And, because we got to finish the 10 things you need to know about Wi-Fi and move on to the next series. So,
yeah, which is a little teaser, but we actually have had some ideas cooked up. So we got to finish this so we can get to those.
But there are ideas, so they're not exactly great yet. No. So,
and we've had some feedback from recent episodes, so we've got some other ideas that are ruminating. Yeah. We actually got some good feedback from last episode, including an email that wasn't spam. So yay!
And then we promptly did not reply to it. So
we've got to process it, and we can't seem too desperate. So, anyways, top 10 time again. So we're on number 8. Which is awesome.
Yeah, so the 10 things you need to know about Wi-Fi, or at least the 10 things that we came up with. So let's see. Here we are. Let's run through the 7 that we've covered. In case you're joining us late, I really suggest you go back and watch some of these because they do tie together. The client's always in charge. More is not always better. What are the requirements? It all starts with a good design. Default isn't always the best. Trust but verify. And then the last time we were in this series, we were talking about security is great until the client doesn't support it, which was fun because last week I got an email, it was a message from somebody, and they were asking about security and clients supporting security and everything. So very apropos topics. But today, for number 8, we're going to go with it's not always about the speed. So, let's get into this because I personally I've been looking forward to this one for a while now, because this is one of John's triggering things. So basically, I'm just going to trigger John and say, it actually is kind of about the speed, and then I go 3, 2.
It depends.
And then John goes.
And I laugh because I've talked about this. I've done some client presentations over the last probably month or so, and this has been a hot topic. Everybody wants to talk about the speed, and we've talked about, I believe we've mentioned it before. It's certainly been talked about in the wireless community, the old drag racing of the bus. And I don't know if I would say triggers me, but it's definitely something. And I know you're looking forward to this because you've been sitting on this one for a while. You don't tell me about these until like the day before. But the reality of it is so much time, and I could blame marketing potentially, maybe, not our marketing, just marketing in general, because everybody goes to the big box stores and they look at the boxes of the home Wi-Fi and they're like, but it tells me I'm going to get like 9.6 gigabits per second. And I don't get that. And the first part I go back to, and this is something I learned, I mean, at this point, it was probably 10 years ago. We had Chris Avance up at my former job to look at.
Who's Chris?
Chris is a buddy of ours, works for Wi-Fi training. If you're looking for training opportunities in general, highly recommend him. We'll plug them, whatever. But so Chris was doing a class for us at my last job, and it was a sidebar conversation about like speeds and client experience. And I mean, I'm sure the speed is probably bumped up a little bit, but thinking about streaming and doing, Teams and voice over IP, or voice over Wi-Fi at that point, really. He pointed out, he said, if you can guarantee 20 to 30 meg per second consistently, you're probably not going to get too many people calling and complaining about anything because it's a consistent, reliable experience, and everything that they need to use on a daily basis is going to work just fine. And that's kind of that's stuck with me from that point on. And yeah, sure, we all want to say, oh, we just downloaded like the Magna Carta in 13 milliseconds or whatever, but it's not reality, right? Like, how often are you really doing that? Now, you come from a background of another customer or another employer, I should say. Yeah, I don't know. It came to me. But you come from a former life where downloading a very large file in a very short period of time mattered to certain people because you worked at an airport. And so there are definitely use cases or instances where you want them to be quick as well as consistent. Right? You don't want to keep anybody on there at a crippled speed for an extended period of time and things like that. But it's a very loaded topic. And the speed, it's nice. I mean, to me, I think it pops. Obviously, with Wi-Fi 7, everybody's looking at those numbers, and I'm bad. I don't remember. I don't have our data sheets handy, but we're talking massive speed across the three radios. And everybody's excited about it. I get it. But the reality is, do we really need it? Not really the reality. The question is, do we really need all of that? And on the one hand, we would always say we want more and more. But what say you, Mr. Palmer?
Well, other than I don't know anybody who's downloading the Magna Carta. I can't imagine that's really big.
I'm waiting for. Well, okay, fine. Like the Encyclopedia Britannica. How about that?
That's probably gone with you could have gone with like a TV series, like a popular TV or. Like
I don't want to encourage anything that's going to violate the Digital Millennium Copyright Act or anything like that. So I'm not going to. But something large, and we'll leave it at that. And keep it as.
Yeah, I always use the Library of Congress just because that'd be a ginormous file. Not that you could actually get it, but anyway. But you're right, and this is something that we know. You and I know this. We know this. We've known this for a while. It's something you learn very early on in doing Wi-Fi. Is that while it is fun to drag race the bus, and we all do it, right? We all pull out our phones, and we're like, let me see what speed I can get. And it's fun. It's fun to see, when you do achieve those really high numbers, it feels good. You're just like, wow, I made this work. I made this happen. But, and yeah, there are situations where, having more speed is a good thing. But when you talk about the numbers from the data sheets, the one thing that we all know and not too many other people seem to know is those speeds from the data sheets are all about the maximum phi rate that's achievable if you are meeting all of the criteria, right? If you get the widest channel, if you get the highest MCS rates, and if you have the maximum spatial streams that are allowed, then you get that. That's where like the 48 gigabits per second comes from, is 16 spatial streams. At least in the data sheets, they'll be like, okay, because we're not running 16 spatial streams on the AP, the best you can get out of this is going to be, not 46 or 48. You're going to be down in the single digit gigabits per second. But still, when you say it like that, single digit gigabits per second, you're like you can get 4, 5, maybe even up to 9 gigabits per second over the air phi rate. Let's just stop for a second and not worry about all of the speed racing, speed testing, and all that stuff. But just think about what we're actually saying is that you can get a PHY rate of anywhere from 5 to 9 gigabits per second over the air. And then I'd ask everybody, what type of wired speeds do you have at your house right now? What if you're sitting in a cube farm, are you connected to a multi-gigabit per second port? I will tell you, you're probably somewhere between 1 and 2.5 gigabits per second, and yet Wi-Fi, we're talking about 5 to 9. I mean, that's just crazy to me to think about that.
Well,
think about that for a second.
It's not even just that it's crazy. It's getting to the point of, I don't want to say it's lunacy. I don't want to say it's preposterous. I don't want to throw out some big, crazy words. But the reality is, you hit the nail on the head, right? There's always going to be a bottleneck in anybody's network, whether you're at home or the office. We've talked about this before, and I'm sure this is probably part of it played into why we're talking about it today. So Wi-Fi 7, it's your favorite topic from 2023. We know you love it so much. But the reality is this: all of the APs that we've gotten our hands on to test yet, the R770, the newly announced T670, everything else is coming down the pike that we're hearing about, whether it's ours or not. They all promise speeds in excess of a gig. So if you're testing at home, odds are a speed test to the internet will never ever show you your true speed. And odds are most people running speed tests at home to the internet don't know that they can run something on the LAN that'll actually get them the speed test results that they're looking for. Meaning it's sort of an imperfect test. Not even imperfect, it's an inaccurate test. And of course, as we both know, oftentimes our end users use speed test as a troubleshooting tool.
So
there's my trigger.
It's not an inaccurate test. I mean,
it's a loaded question, right? It's a loaded comment.
It is a loaded question. I will give you that. And this is, I think, where the problem comes in. Because in my previous job, speed was a big concern. People wanted to download movies on Netflix because if you have a Netflix account, you can go into the Netflix app on your mobile device. Can't do it on a laptop. I tried. It doesn't work like that. On a tablet or a phone, you can go into Netflix and you can say, "Hey, download me." And they even have a category. It says download, right? What's available for me to download? And you can download that stuff before you get on a plane, so that you're not, you can watch what you want on your own device instead of being, stuck watching whatever the plane has on their in-flight entertainment. And so speed test was always a big thing because people wanted to get that data down. But I had a manager who would walk around once a week with his phone and do nothing but run speed tests the entire time he was walking. And as long as it came back with what he wanted, then everything was okay. But if it didn't, then it was a trouble ticket to me saying, "Hey, the speed test doesn't work." And then I would then be like, "Oh, how about we do this a different way?" Because the problem with the normal speed tests are you have to understand what exactly you're speed testing, so that when you see the results, you understand what those results mean. It doesn't mean that they're invalid. It doesn't mean that they're incorrect. It just means that there's other things in play that we can't impact. And so what I want to do is I want to show off something that I honestly, and this is honest, I will pledge to all of our listeners, I did not do this for this episode. I actually did this last week because I was curious about something. And so what I did is I ran a speed test from my laptop. Now, my laptop was sitting in my dock. My laptop was wired into my wired network. The switch that it's plugged into showed that I was connected at 1 gigabit per second, full duplex. And I ran a speed test, and this was the results. And I sent it to John on Slack. I said, "Hey, John, look at this." Now, for everybody else, the thing that made me the most happy was the fact that my upload is now 23.5 megabits per second. And if you've been a longtime listener or viewer of the show, that's one of my pet peeves is I couldn't get more than 5 megabits per second. But recently they just changed the the definition of what broadband high-speed internet access is in the United States. And so my ISP was forced to upgrade me to meet those those requirements. So thank you, FCC, everybody who got me faster upload speeds.
You're cooking like it's 2010.
Look,
beggars can't be choosers.
Look, I will tell you 100%. I do not need that type of download. I guarantee you, I don't need it.
But again, that goes into the marketing of it. Like I have no problem. We've hit on marketing before. You were fine with very few exceptions with your previous upload and download. Users almost always need download, right? The upload, most people don't upload a lot. Some power users do. Now, I don't want to say like not a lot, but you're downloading more, you're consuming more, you're streaming, you're pulling down Netflix or YouTube or whatever. You're doing a lot more download than upload typically. That's part of the reason why they do what they do. But you were fine. I mean, I know you would have liked more, but we've done the podcast over Wi-Fi on your substandard connection until you got upgraded, and had no issues until we got into the one application that we used before this current iteration that you couldn't upload fast enough or you couldn't upload well enough. But other than that, it had no impact on your daily life, as far as I know. And
it didn't. Now, I was perfectly fine with 200 down, and I would have liked 25 up. I now have 25 up, or 23.5, which we'll see here in a second. But from my house, from my use case here at my house, I was perfectly fine with 200 down. I had no problems with that because I'd never use it. I would watch. I would purposely have the family go do their thing, and then I would watch my firewalls, and I could see the per second bandwidth utilization through my firewall, and I would never get over 100 for the most part. I would sometimes peak to 60 or 70 download. I would rarely get above 70. And so I'm like, for those one or two times a day when I might get up to 100, I was perfectly fine with 200. I wanted 25 up. I'd love symmetrical, but where I live, it's not happening. So I'm fine with it. But I wanted to show this because I did this test for a specific reason. This particular speed test was from my wired laptop, so no Wi-Fi involved. This was simply, what is the best use case I could get? What was the best case scenario for my house? And given my network, we're looking at 353 down and 23 up. Now, I did this because I wanted a benchmark. I wanted something where I could say, this is my benchmark. This is the best that I can get. So then when I went up and used my phone at 8:33 p.m., as you can see from the screenshot, and I sent this to John at would have been 10:33 his time. I was like, hey, this is what I just got on my phone on one of my APs. I got a 336 down and a 23.5 up. So in this particular use case, I would tell you that my speed test was good. What I was comparing was, can the AP that I have mounted in my upstairs, can that AP keep up with what my internet provider is capping me at? Now, most of you will notice that the upload is identical. Even, I mean, as close as we're going to get identical, right? The jitter and the ping and all that stuff is, it's almost identical. And then the download, there's a 17 megabit per second difference, which I expect because it's Wi-Fi. So in this particular case, when I'm running these two speed tests and I get these two numbers, I look at them and I go, you know what? That little AP that I threw up in my upstairs hallway, yes, I put it in my hallway, is perfectly fine with keeping up with my internet. So I don't need anything more. And that's why I did the speed test. And that's the only reason I did the speed test. But I happen to know all the other limitations that go around with it. It might have been it was definitely a different time of day. It might have been, somebody else's, hitting the speed test server. There's any number of things that could really have impacted that download speed, to include the Wi-Fi overhead. So I'm just kind of going, you know what? That's perfectly fine with me. However, John, I'm going to let you sort of narrate this next one. What would have been a better way for me to run this test?
Well, I mean, your test in your particular use case is valid, and actually reminded me of something I did last year. It's perfectly valid. But if you're it depends. We're going to beat the tar out of that today. Like I said, I go back to, I used to get hammered about this. People would call us up when I worked at my last job. I did a speed test. I'm getting really bad speeds. That's not necessarily indicative of the Wi-Fi. It's the same as if you're at home and your wife calls you up, or your partner, your spouse, whatever, calls you up and says, hey, the internet doesn't work. I'm on the network and I can get to my servers, so the network is fine. They'd say, oh, the Wi-Fi is down. No, it's not. It's the internet. Not, but it's semantics. It's semantics to those that aren't in our, world. But that's kind of what it boils down to. So to the typical user, to the end user, a lot of times speed test is something it's accessible. It's a tool that they can run, and they're going to use that to say my Wi-Fi is good or bad. What we wound up having to do there, and what a lot of people wind up doing, is you build a speed test server on your own, and you run that on the LAN. And I know you had this geared up. Now WLAN Pi has one. There's ways to run on Linux or ESXi or things like that. You can set up LibreSpeed is a popular one. I think it's the popular one, actually. It's basically, I think, open source back end of what this is. And this is actually LibreSpeed.
Yep.
And this is the one that I've told everybody in all of my classes to do this. Not that I've told them to do this, but if you're going to do this, this is what you do. And because you can go out to the field knowing your internal speed test server, and you can sit there and you can hit that and say, look, I'm getting, a gig up and a gig down from the Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi is clean. The RF is fine. It's something to do with the upstream. Now that could be the upstream providers having a problem. That could be, hey, by the way, I only have 300 meg up, 25 down. So guess what? Or reverse that.
Yeah.
300 down, 25 up. So I'm hitting my cap when I'm going to UCLA. It could be any number of other bottlenecks, but this is one of those ways to rule out parts of the network so that maybe they do have a speed problem, but it's not on the APs, it's not on the controller. And so I'm a big fan of these, and I've suggested this to a lot of different classes I've had over the years. And ultimately, back to the Wi-Fi 7 point, because again, your favorite topic, this is now more important than ever because, again, typical home users do not have more than a gig. I can get 2 gig. I'm not doubling more than doubling my internet cost to have 2 gig at home. I don't need it. Arguably, I don't need a gig, but it's plenty affordable, and I'm not going to bother to go down. But you can't do what the max throughput of a Wi-Fi 7 AP is on a typical home internet link. Some offices can't even max out the theoretical throughput of it. I mean, we've got APs out there with a 10 gig uplink. You might not even have a 10 gig uplink on the switch port it's connecting to. I mean, there's a litany of bottlenecks that it goes down to. So it's one of those, if you want to do this drag race, you need to make sure that all of your bottlenecks are known. So you know that the max theoretical throughput you're going to get is it 2.5 gig? Cause that's you're connected to a 2.5 gig port on your switch. Is it a 10 gig NIC you have a 10 gig Ethernet port, you've got a 10 gig NIC to your speed test server? Can your speed test server hold up and support that? I mean, there's a whole number of different constraints, but you know what your bottlenecks are. And ultimately at this point, when you run something like this, LibreSpeed on WLAN Pi or on a home server, you control the bottlenecks so that this number looks, I don't want to say better. It gives you a more accurate representation of what your client device and your access point can do. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to blow the secret, right? This is the same AP and the same client that did the 325 and 25 or 325 and 323, if I'm not mistaken.
This is still wired, so this isn't Wi-Fi.
Okay.
I don't use Wi-Fi on my work computer, John. I I tell people all the time, because I know better. I know better not to use Wi-Fi because I need to depend on it. And guess what? My dock is literally so my laptop doesn't move. And what's the rule, John?
If it doesn't move, plug it in.
You wire it. So of course my dock, which is designed to not move, is wired. But my point being, this is the exact same client with no Wi-Fi, but it's the same client going through. In this case, I'm going from this to an ICX 7550 and then using a 10 gig fiber running back here to my ICX 7150 and then connecting to my WLAN Pi, which is just sitting here behind my left shoulder over here. But the problem is, and this is something I wanted to bring up here at the end, this is a problem that, well, I hate to say a problem because it's not really a problem, right? It's just something to know and understand. Whereas the WLAN Pi that it's running on a Raspberry Pi is still 1 gigabit per second NIC, which then begs the question of we need something that can keep up to the Wi-Fi speeds to run these types of speed tests. So you and I have talked about this in the past. I did some work in the labs a few weeks ago, and we actually were able to run a Libra speed test server on a Linux server that had a 10 gig NIC, and we were able to actually max out the Wi-Fi. And so it can be done, but now it's one of those things where speed tests are good if you understand the limitations, if you understand what they do, what they mean, how all that stuff works. Speed tests have their value, but you need to know and understand the whats and the whys of speed tests.
And that's it in a nutshell. It really is. Anybody out there that loves speed tests, I'm not being dismissive of it. It has a place. I was reminded of a site survey I did or a site visit I did last year. And, I don't have the typical tools that I used to do when I was doing this, like supporting a customer every day as the engineer. I don't have my handy dandy net ally tools or anything like that. So I had my laptop, I had my wireless tools, and I used speed test because one of the biggest reasons that I went down there was to make sure that the customers in the different sites were getting the speeds that they were promised by contract. And so it was, it wasn't a huge SLA. I think it was like 100 meg up, and I forget or 100 meg down, and I forget what the upload was. I think it was half that. And so I plugged into the wired switch because I'm getting like 92, 93, 95. And I'm like, well, if that's 100 is the target, then that's fine. But let's plug into the switch, as you did with your example, and let's see what I'm getting on the wired side. And the wired was pulling like 110. And I'm like, we're perfectly fine then. There's not a huge variance. It would be within what I would consider to be within tolerance of wired versus wireless difference because of overhead and things like that. And so everything was fine. Now, if I plugged that in and did the speed test and I got like 50% different, I'd be like, there's something I've got to go look at. The switch ports are wrong. There's some routing issue. Something is not right how the wireless traffic is being handled versus the wired. But when I confirmed that we were within effectively 10% wired versus wireless, I'm like, no, we're golden. So that was kind of, that was good for that. But it's got a place. I made this line. I said this to you yesterday, and I'm looking for it because I knew I was going to forget it. And I should have had it handy, but I didn't because I'm a dork. But the effect of it is when you don't have any other tools, it's perfectly fine. When you have other tools to do your troubleshooting, you realize that it still is a good tool, but it is a tool that you don't rely on or don't have to rely on nearly as much as you used to. It's one of those where when everything isn't, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think I finally actually got that right. I always screw that up.
You did.
And so, and that's how speed test is for a lot of people because the typical end user, 95% of our people that we deal with on a daily basis when we're in IT don't have the tools and the knowledge that we do. And that can be true within IT even. Like you could talk to a network engineer that does not, they think they know Wi-Fi, but they don't necessarily understand all the nuance of Wi-Fi. But, if I'm building this out I highly recommend whether you put it on a server, you run it on WLAN Pi. I think NetAlly used to have some probes that could do this, where you would have like an endpoint that you could literally do it from the handheld tool, and just there's plenty of other opportunities to do this, and it's a huge boost, I think, because you can still use speed test. You can even give it to your end users and be like, hey, do me a favor, before I walk out your desk, hit this IP address. It's an internal speed test server. Let's see what you're getting, because then I know before I even go out to check it what my issue might be. Are they getting really good speeds on the local area network? Okay, then I have a WAN issue, maybe. But then I look at the site and, well, the site only has a 300 meg link. So if they're telling me they're getting 300 meg down, then they're not going to get any better than that when they're hitting speedtest.net. So it's important to understand that. But to circle back on this, it's not all about the speed. I had this conversation with a customer about a week and a half ago. They want, for marketing reasons, everybody wants to sell like the gig speeds or gigabit plus, and now with Wi-Fi 7, it's only going to get worse, or not worse, but it's only going to get higher numbers, right? But the reality is, if you can build a network that's clean, that's reliable, that can consistently deliver that performance every day, 99 times out of 100, I'm getting the same exact performance. I'm not turning off my Wi-Fi to use cellular, for example, if I'm at a public Wi-Fi network or something like that. And that's what I think a lot of people really need. They need that. They need the consistency more than they need the speed. The speed is great. If you can get both, great. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not going to crucify you. But that's where I'm at. Give me consistently good performance over speed, and I'll take that every day of the week.
The last thing I'll tell you, and you kind of said it, and I always come back to this eventually, is, speed test is good because that's what the end user, that's what, when you own a network, when you're responsible for running the network for an organization, that's what your customer is going to use is speed test. That's what they know. So knowing that that's the tool that they use is handy to know, but hey, if I can make that look good, then, or at least know and understand, and I can explain it away, then that's what you have to get. But if you can't, you have to be at their level to do it. But it's funny because, you did wrap it up perfectly with, and that's why I went to the teaser for our next episode in this is about the Wi-Fi. It's not all about the speed. It's about the consistency. It's about all of those other things. And that leads us into number 9. So nicely done there, Mr. Deegan.
Well, you said you told me yesterday you were going to kind of just let me get triggered and go off, and you weren't kidding. And it's a hot debate. This is one of those you could have at any Wi-Fi conference, and it'll go 18 different ways, depending on how many engineers you have in a circle. And but it's like you said. I mean, they're going to use what they're going to use. You need to know what they're going to use, and you need to understand what you're going to do with that data. Them telling you they're having a bad speed test is not like, I guess with my age, I don't roll my eyes on it anymore or at it, whatever.
Oh, I do. Right here. I roll my eyes.
I've fine, but it's a piece of data, right? At the end of the day, I know, like, I see it as a teachable moment. I try and explain to them that, like, now I'm not going to try and necessarily talk to, say, an administrative assistant because they don't care. Some of them actually really good, believe it or not. But
yeah,
you talk to them and you try to educate them a little bit and say, like, it doesn't really tell you that the Wi-Fi is not good. It just tells you you've got an issue hitting the internet, which could be the Wi-Fi. It could be something else. And I need all the information I can get, because sometimes I mean, how many of us have had this where, like, I told you the Wi-Fi was bad, the speed test sucks. That's all you need to know, right? Like, no, I really need to see, like, RF is clean. I mean, if I'm going out there with a probe or a tool or whatever, and I'm saying, well, I've got, like, my SNR is like 35 or 40, and I've got, like, neg 36 signal or whatever, and I'm sure the numbers don't match up, so someone will kill me on that. But if those are the kinds of numbers I'm seeing on my tools, then there's no reason for that speed test to be coming up bad. At least there's no reason from the RF perspective, in theory, to be coming up bad. So it's important. It's a data point. I see it as a teachable moment.
It's a data point, and the worst is when they put in the ticket because the speed test is slow, and then you find, which means the Wi-Fi is bad, and then you go look and you realize there is a problem. Like, oh, we were supposed to be 40 megahertz wide and it got set to 20, or, oh, we now have co-channel interference, or the power got turned down. So then you go then you fix it, you get it back to where it's supposed to be and it's working. And then they go, see, I told you it was bad because the speed test. And you're just like, no. There was a lot of other things that you could have picked up on that was why the Wi-Fi was bad, not the speed test. So
yeah, and you had another one. Channel width is another one, right? Like if you have 20 megahertz wide channels, I mean, look at the MCS index. Based on that what your max speed is based on certain characteristics. So if you choose to run 20 megahertz wide channels, I don't want to sit there and say you're artificially handicapping yourself. There's probably a very good reason to do it if you need to use a lot of channels in a small amount of space. But you're not going to get the same speeds.
Does anybody choose to run 20 megahertz, or are you kind of I would like to think that you don't choose to run 20 megahertz wide channels. That's just what you end up getting because of other requirements.
You run what you can, right? You run as wide as you can.
And if 20 is what you can run, then 20 is what you run.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I come from a network where, yes, at one point I did run 20 wide because we didn't know. We were in the process of learning Wi-Fi, and we were in the process of getting our tools and our kit built out. So we were like, 20 wide's good. We've got all the channels. We've got like 50 APs on the floor, 20 wide. We've got plenty of channel reuse, et cetera, and so forth. And then as we got to understand the Wi-Fi and learned what we didn't previously know, we realized, we can get away with 40. And we might even have some sites that we can get away with 80. Now we're really, living dangerously, but go as wide as you can, but understand that those kinds of decisions from a Wi-Fi engineer's perspective, those kinds of design decisions have implications to the max speed that you're going to see at the far end. So if you've got, perfect example, just throwing it out, if you have a service level agreement with a customer that says that they need to hit a certain speed, you better make sure that the channel widths that you've picked for that design support that SLA. Because if they don't, they have to. And if they can't, then you need to tell them because their SLA is kind of shot in the foot. So again, we could spend all the time in the world on this. I'll go back and say, like, again, give me consistently good performance versus blazing fast drag racing of a bus. But we'll always do it, and there's a good way to do it, and there's a not so good way to do it, and 100% agree and recommend, whether it's a WLAN Pi or your own speed test server. You might only use it once, and it'll come in incredibly handy.
That's the nice thing about the WLAN Pi is it comes in incredibly handy for a lot of different things. So
that it does.
Look into that, everybody.
Yes.
But yeah, I think we can wrap this one up, but it really kind of tees it up for number 9 in the series. So please come back for that one in a couple of weeks. And because John and I are going to spend some more time talking about Wi-Fi speeds. I'll give you a second teaser on that one, John.
Oh, man.
Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi speed.
Are you going to trigger me again?
I hope not.
Well, on that note, Mr. Palmer, I think it's time for us to say we'll see everybody in the next episode.
See you guys.
Hey there. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show and haven't yet done so, please like and subscribe. If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us at ruckcast@comscope.com. Jim and I both read those emails. To learn more about any Ruckus products or services that we've talked about on this or any other prior podcast, please check out our About section of the show or the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.